Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. It's May 20th, a Thursday night, and while I'm sitting here with Donald G. James from NASA, retired, I just mentioned to Donald before he went on air that I made one of a huge sacrifice to be here with Donald because the Rutgers spring football game is going on in the television in the den, and I'm sitting here with Donald. But this is just way more precious and poignant to spend time. So let me, I met Donald through the mysteries of the universe in the internet. We met in instant chemistry, and after a few messages and a few appointments to have messages and Zooms, we finally found out that we have a bunch in common, and the fact that he was number 2 man at NASA before retiring a few years ago, and as Donald told me, he was one phone call away from the president. And I'm kind of a groupie, and that was kind of amazing for me, and the whole Donald's whole story. And Donald's story now, and I'm going to keep showing this, is that he just finished writing this book called Manners. Will take you where brains and money won't. Wisdom from Momma and 35 years at NASA. And as I said to Donald, there's so much I want to unpack in this little brief Johnny Carson monologue. As I said to Donald, when I grew up, there was a book in 1956 called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Dale Carnegie, and the thing I took away from that as a little kid, because my mother made me, was if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. And it's manners, it's manners. And I believe that this will be the next generation to guide, Gen Z above and beyond. I'm in the middle of it, and again, I'm going to introduce Donald in 2 seconds. But one of the things that completely blew me away, on page 16, Donald was talking about his mother had left him a little folder about his brother Charles, who had passed, and she had quoted on that a line from John Reeve Whittier, who happens to be one of my favorite poets. So there's some more synchronicity. And I quote, "For all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these, quote, it might have been, unquote," which just blew me away. And as I am plunging into this. So that's the introduction. I think the time that Donald is going to give us is so precious. The NASA, his experiences in life. So without further ado, and I've spoken enough here, and it's all yours. But Donald, tell us a little bit about yourself, and a little look into your background and education and family and profession. Take it away.
Thank you, Calvin. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your kind words. I feel fortunate to have met you and learn from you and your history, and I love hearing your stories and things of that nature. And perhaps that's one of the things that really inspired me about wanting to get into writing about what I felt was important, was our ability to have meaningful discussions with people for the purpose of learning from them and from growing from them, and taking away things to make you a better person. And I've been fortunate to do that, and clearly I've been fortunate to do that with you. And I especially appreciate that you were willing to sacrifice your beloved Rutgers team to spend time with me. It's kind of an interesting analogy or metaphor if you think about it, right? Because in ways, if we want something in our life, we often have to start with what are we willing to sacrifice in order to get it, and what are the trade-offs. And so I certainly hope that I can deliver on my side of the bargain. I live in Pleasanton, California, Northern California. I'm born and reared in California. I went to school in California, went to graduate school in Washington, D.C. And as you said, Calvin, I had an incredible career, 35 years at NASA. At some point, we can talk about the journey that was. And I ended up in my dream job as the Associate Administrator for Education. I was appointed by the NASA administrator. Well, I had to compete for the job, but once they said, Donald's our guy, he had to actually sign the document. And so I have the good fortune of working for a really great man, a 4-time space shuttle flyer, former commandant of the Marine Corps, head of the Naval Academy, Charlie Bolden. And he, of course, was appointed by President Obama. So it was true. I was one person away from the president. I didn't get a lot of face time with the president. I met the man a couple of times, but there were times when I had to go to the White House for dealing with administration stuff. But it was really an honor for me. And so the key is, which is about the book, and I look forward to getting into it, is that, and I want the listeners and viewers to know this, I was not a straight A student. I was not a more magna student. I did okay. I was probably B plus for the most part. I did better in graduate school. I didn't speak 5 languages, play 3 instruments, start a company, start a nonprofit. I didn't do any of those things. But when I think about how far I made it in the government, I wondered, well, how did I manage to do that? I knew enough to do the job, and I am very proud of some of the things I accomplished, and but I wasn't, a super rock star, if you will. But I really concluded that it was my manners and how I learned about manners from my mother that made the difference. So this book, in many ways, is about how I view the importance of manners in one's career progression, and I'll even go so far as to say life. As I tell a lot of students, being smart isn't good enough. A lot of people are smart. Everybody is smart at NASA, but not everybody is successful at NASA the way I define it. And so you have to know how to do your job, right? If you're a pilot, you need to know how to fly the plane. My brother's a pilot. But he will tell you that oftentimes manners is the tiebreaker. People going in for an interview. He gives specific examples where he knows for a fact somebody did not get hired at the airline where he worked for, not because he wasn't a good aviator, it was because he showed poor manners. So I'm trying to impress upon people to think about this as they go through life. So I'm just grateful to have this conversation. I think the time is right for this conversation, and I can't think of a better person to have this conversation than with you, Calvin.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Before we went on air, I mentioned that I taught at Rutgers a couple of years ago, and these were young students I taught in career explorations. But my takeaway, we just said this before we went on air. My takeaway is they're brilliant.
Yeah.
And I actually was in awe of the depth and the range and the knowledge that was stored up here in these young students. But my takeaway was, interpersonal skills, manners, using your verbiage, manners, just conducting. They need it, and that's why I keep envisioning as I travel around now and do this. I envision this to be part. It should be part of their reading and their education. So before we jump into manners, a couple of questions. Actually, I could talk to you about NASA all night, but you didn't grow up dreaming of working for NASA. So how did you end up there, and why?
It's I was aware of the space program, I was aware of the lunar program and all of that stuff, but as a kid, I wasn't thinking about, I want to work to be an astronaut. What I really was excited about was airplanes. I grew up at a time when the country was just entertaining the idea of building a supersonic jet. As we know, the Europeans ended up building the only viable commercial one. I know the Russians had one too, but it wasn't as viable as the Concorde. But I got excited about the supersonic transport, and it was actually this kind of competition between jumbo jets versus supersonic planes. I mean, to me, the idea that a plane can fly faster than sound was like, wow, that's amazing. So that's what I wanted to do, and I wanted to fly planes, and so did my brother. We lived near an airport, so we were exposed to planes, and then early in my life, with my dad being in the Foreign Service, we traveled around the world, so we got to be inside airplanes. That's what I wanted to do. So when I got into college, I figured out that the only way to learn how to fly is I had to go to the Air Force, and the path of the Air Force was through ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps. And then I had to pick a major, and so I'm looking through in those days, there's no internet or computer. You had a book, and you went through the book, and the first couple of things, aerospace engineering. I said, wow, that sounds close. That's not airplanes. I'll pick that major. This is a pro tip number one. If any students are watching this, pay very close attention to how you choose your majors and what information you get, because I didn't really do it the right way in hindsight. And what I discovered, and my first lesson that I learned about myself, in many ways, the Manners book is about learning about yourself. In fact, chapter 2 is called Know Thyself, is that I learned that the military culture and I didn't go well together. I didn't really know that. I mean, I don't have anything against the military. I mean, I did come of age in the height of the Vietnam War. I went down to the post office with my buddy to register for the draft like we were required to, although it was winding down at the time. But in practice, like being in the space of that culture, I learned that it wasn't for me. That began a long cathartic process of rethinking my whole vision for my future. And that was kind of depressing for a while. And so I changed completely and said, okay, I'm going to study international affairs because I traveled around the world. I became sensitive to the problems of development in third world countries. And great, I'm going to go solve the problems of destitution and poverty. That's what I wanted to do. So I got my degree in international relations, and then, I kind of knew I needed to go to graduate school. My parents made it clear, we spotted you through undergrad, you're on your own for grad school. So I hustled a fellowship at the National Science Foundation to go study economics, because I figured good grounding in economics will, set me straight to go solve all the world's problems. About halfway through graduate school, it dawned on me that I wasn't really trained to do anything. I was trained to think like an economist think. I mean, I could talk about margin of utility, I could talk about supply and demand curves, and a bunch of things like that, but I didn't want to teach economics. And so I got nervous, like, well, how am I going to do work? And, most of the jobs you required experience and things of that nature. And so one of the educators in the college that I attended, this was at American University in Washington, D.C., said, well, there's this program called the Presidential Management Intern Program. And if you're successful in actually getting selected to be a presidential intern, federal agencies have slots that they can hire you into, and you can choose what agency you want to go to. So I was very fortunate that I made it through the gauntlet, through the school, to actually get in front of the panel that was going to decide my fate on being a presidential intern. I may come back to this later, but pro tip number 2, this process involved the school doing a video simulation of the interview. And I have a chapter on interviewing, and one of the things I say in there is take full advantage of every opportunity you get to interview, even if you don't intend to take a job, just practice. Because here's what I found out. Because I did this interview, and they were filming us, and they had this fake panel of people asking us questions, and I thought I did great. I was just so proud of myself and everything. And then I looked at the tape, and I was like, oh my God, it literally, Calvin, it was as if I was interviewing my notebook, because my head was down. I hardly looked up at the people. I didn't look them in the eye. I had some ums and ahs. And so having a video tape of me do this made me see myself in a way that I hadn't seen before.
Right.
And you kind of know what it's like, right? You know, sort of like you see yourself every day when you go to the bathroom, take a shower, and you just go on about your business. You're totally not thinking about it. And then someone shows you a picture of yourself in your bathing suit, and you like freak out because it's like, oh my God, look at my body. It looks horrible, or my hair looks horrible, or whatever it is. It's kind of like that. So it's helpful to have external imagery and viewpoints and feedback about yourself, I think, in order to hone your skills, in this case, the skill of interviewing. Long story short, I got a letter from NASA out of the blue. I said, why did I get a letter from NASA? It was a long time since I studied aerospace engineering. In fact, the last time I studied aerospace engineering, I was using a slide rule. I hope some of your listeners actually know what a slide rule is, because
most don't know what it is.
We did not have calculators. In order to do calculations, you had to use this physical device that you slide back and forth, and it gives you an answer on something. Anyway, I wasn't going to do the interview, but my father said, I think you should take advantage of every interview opportunity you can get. I said, Dad, but I want to go save the world from poverty and destitution. He said, yeah, but practicing interviewing is not a bad idea. So I did the interview. And I told the interviewers very candidly, I said, look, if I get selected, I'll strongly consider NASA, but honestly, I'm trying to find work in another department to go save the world. But I'll certainly do my best if I'm selected and I choose to work here. The next day I got a call. They said, we'd like to hire you. And I was just waking up and I couldn't believe it. And I thought, wow, that's really amazing. I was very candid about my interest. Anyway, they called like every day for 3 days because I kept putting them off and putting them off. And finally, my dad, who is a diplomat, and he said very diplomatically, because I was living with him at the time, that, this is a job that actually pays a salary, son, and you got nothing, so maybe you might want to think about it. And he said, why don't you just take the job, get some work experience for about 3 to 5 years, and then you can figure out what you want to do. And so that's what I did. And I reflected on the interview. I had some interesting feedback from the personnel person. And so I learned a lot about my technique and how I interviewed, which I think made the difference. I mean, I couldn't calculate, differential equation or delta V's or, aspect ratios. I mean, I knew a little bit about aspect ratio. I didn't know any of the technical stuff that I thought NASA would want to know. But that's not why they hired me. They hired me because I think they knew that I had great manners, I was willing to learn, and there are a lot of jobs in NASA that don't require me to do advanced calculations. That's why I think they hired me. The reason I stayed at NASA was because of the Challenger accident in 1986, because I got involved in that. We can talk about that, but that changed my life totally. And I decided I wanted to hang my hat at NASA because I saw how much the Challenger accident impacted the nation, and I wanted to be a part of that.
Wow.
So that's how I got to NASA, and that's why I stayed.
Wow. Somewhere I read, or we discussed it, was it on that initial interview that you wore dark suit, a red tie, and white shirt?
Yeah.
And somebody who was also up for that position walked in with sunglasses and an open shirt?
Yeah. Yeah, I remember him clearly. I remember when he came in, and I took it for granted that there was a proper way to dress, and he didn't dress that way. And the only reason I knew that it had somewhat of an impact on the interviewers is that the personnel guy thanked me later because they liked me. They said, you were really great. You wore your dark suit and your red tie, and your shoes were polished. I mean, he was talking about my attire. Now, one can be forgiven for thinking that my attire is not what's going to have me do productive work at NASA, but your attire, in some respects, is an indicator of the type of person you are, or the type of personality you have. And the way I like to look at it is, it was a sign of respect for the interviewers that I dressed up, and that their time cavalierly. Now, you could argue in today's world that that may not be the same, and it may not be, but I would I would suggest to people to pay attention to things like that when they're going for an interview. So yeah, I think it made a difference.
Okay. I was because when I taught, part of the syllabus was going on an interview, and
Yeah,
since a lot of stuff was heading towards, even before the pandemic, I mean, and a lot of the interviews were virtual, and
yeah,
some of the things I taught is, look presentable.
yeah,
Don't walk around in a t-shirt. So what you're saying is so valuable for young people.
yeah.
So, I could ask you a million questions about NASA, but let's talk about what inspired you to do this after you left NASA, and how is matters in NASA related, or are they related in your world?
Yes. Um, so the summer after I retired, so I retired March of 2017, that summer, the chief scientist at the facility where I work, NASA Ames Research Center in Silicon Valley, asked me if I would come and speak to that summer's crop of interns. We always had interns. These were interns that were part of a program that I was responsible for. So, of course, I agree because I love talking to students, and I talked about my career. I talked about what I learned and things of that nature. And at the end, during the question and answer session, a young man asked me if I could go back to my younger self, 20s, 20 or so, knowing what I know now, how would I advise young Donald?
What a great question.
That was a great question. So I thought about it, and I gave him three answers. I said the first thing that I would tell young Donald is to say yes more to opportunities. I felt that in my career there were a lot of things that I didn't say yes to when I was asked because I was afraid, I was concerned. I had a bit of imposter syndrome. I didn't go to Harvard or MIT or Rutgers. So, I wasn't sure, like, can I really do this? So in hindsight, I wish I would have tried more. I did say yes to a lot of things, but I wish I would have tried more. The second thing I told that young man is, I would really tell Donald that he ought to pay attention to the lessons that he learned from his mother about manners. Because Momma had this saying, which is the title of my book: never forget that manners will take you where brains and money won't. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how rich you are. You are going to get what you want and where you want more if you pay attention to your manners. And so I told that young intern that I would tell Donald, I would remind Donald, focus on that, because I exercised poor judgment in the early part of my career, and I did some things that I don't. That I regret, but I wasn't that bad. It wasn't until later that the whole manners things really kicked in. And then I told that young man a third thing. I said, I would tell Donald that when he hears about companies called Facebook and Google and Apple to buy a lot of stock, they laughed because they realized that when I came of age, none of those companies existed.
Right.
None of them. So anyway, I said those three things. That was the prelude to the book. Because after my mother died the next month in August, and I started thinking about, reflecting on my career and thinking about what that kid asked me, I said, I was actually talking to my next door neighbor about his son, and I was getting on my soapbox and going through several of the themes that are in the book. And he literally said to me, he says, man, you ought to write a book about this. This is great stuff. And I looked him dead in the eye and I said, you know what? I'm going to do exactly that.
Wow.
And I made that commitment to him that I was going to do it.
Wow.
So the book is an integration of three things. It's my 35-year career experiences, aligned with all the training that I had, both inside of NASA and outside of NASA. I was a training junkie. That's one thing I did say yes to a lot. If there was a training opportunity, I said, yes, sign me up, I'll do it. I've done more Myers-Briggs and DISC and firewalking and trust fall. I've done it all. So my years of experience working, the training, and the third element is my mother's wisdom and her thoughts and the things that she taught us. That book is an integration of all of those things. That's how the book came about.
Okay, interesting. By the way, a little commercial. Actually, two commercials right in the middle of everything. I'm just asking people to subscribe to this channel. Okay, that's how this channel grows. And the other, when it's time on your website, which will be, there's some great bookmarks with sayings from your mom, and they're brilliant and amazing and so to the point, and so it grabbed me. But these will be available. By the way, it's a great gift.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a great. I'm saying, there you are. They're great, and it'll be available on the website. So anyway, that was my commercial. The bookmarks and subscribe. In this book, it was a congressman, presidential candidate that wrote a foreword.
Yeah.
How'd you get that how'd that happen?
Well, that's Eric Swalwell, who many people may have remembered. He was an early presidential candidate. He was actually the first one to drop out, which ultimately led to Joe Biden being the
Wow.
Wow. He happens to be my representative, and how I met him was he came to my house when he first ran for Congress. He was a district attorney in a neighboring city. And I don't remember too many politicians knocking on my door, but he did. But the thing that impressed me about him was he stood there and we had this is way pre-pandemic. This was back when he first ran. We had this long conversation, and I talked to him about things that I was interested in, particularly NASA and education. And I just remember he stood there and he listened, and he was intent, and he would ask me questions. And after a while, I forgot he's a politician. And then I realized, oh my God, he's probably got to talk to 1 million people, and I'm hogging up his time. And I mean, it's not like I was a rich donor that I was going to give him a lot of money, but I just never forgot his manner, how he showed up to me. Yeah. And of course, I ended up not only supporting him, but I went to several campaign events. I think the first one I went to, he remembered my name, he remembered my family, he remembered where I worked. He introduced me to his wife and eventually his young son. Now I think he's got 2 kids and the third one on the way. And when I went to Washington, D.C., this was, of course, he had already been elected by then. I paid him a courtesy call in my official capacity, and he was very gracious. And so I have to confess, this might be the first time I'm publicly saying this, but Calvin special. When I thought about who I wanted to write the foreword, came about at the time when let's just say the civil discourse, particularly on Capitol Hill and our politics, felt like it was taking a nosedive. I had this fantasy that, manners would be great for our members of Congress and other political leaders. I tend to think like this sometimes. And so I felt that if I could get Eric to agree to do the foreword, that maybe through his influence, he could share this. And so, but it is the case that he impressed me with how he showed up in the first place. And so he agreed to do it. Only thing I shared with him was a synopsis of the book and, why I wrote it, but he wrote what he wrote. And I'm proud of that. And then later he wrote an op-ed for NBC News online. And in the op-ed, he said, every member of Congress ought to read this book. And so, I'm at that stage in my life. I'm 64, Calvin, and I want to give back and do good and do my part as a responsible citizen. in this country, and if this can help do it, then I'm happy. But I don't want to take, my freedoms. I don't want to take the blessings that I have for granted. I don't want to take the fact that I'm very privileged. I'm a very privileged person to have the resources and the house and the friends that I have, the education that I have. And I don't want to just enjoy all that and say, well, good luck to everybody else. I want to try to give back. So his being a part of that and having some degree of influence,
Right.
I sent to the president's wife a copy of the book through him, because if you recall, the day after the inauguration, and I caught this, you can find it by Googling it, President Biden, in his first address to his staff, literally said the only thing that they would get fired for doing is if they were mean to each other and disrespectful. That's what he said. He didn't say, I want to fire you if you give me bad policy advice, or he basically said, if you have bad manners, I'm going to fire you. And I literally fell out of my chair. I called my brother. Did you hear what Joe Biden just said? I couldn't believe it. The man is just, he already gets it. But I thought, he's probably a little busy right now with the pandemic, so I don't have any, fantasy that I'd get him a copy of the book. But maybe his wife can, because she's an educator.
Yeah.
She's really go-getter. And so
Yeah.
I haven't heard from her yet, so I hope she does get it. But I'll talk to anybody who will listen. I'm passionate about this, and I'm passionate about helping other people think through this lens. And so Eric Swalwell, good man.
Right.
Man.
It's interesting. When we hit a certain age, the notion the notion of giving back, it may have been there for long periods of time, but suddenly it kind of congeals.
Yeah, it really does.
It does, and well, I don't want to get too heavy, but you backtracking a little bit. President Biden gives that talk and so forth and so on, and manners was on his mind. I don't know if you already touched on this, but it's worth to go back. What exactly do you mean by manners? And I think if you say it in public, people will kind of think it's an old term.
Yeah. I think most people view manners as sort of a goody-goody two-shoes, just, say please and say thank you, or tip your hat, or open a door for women, and that kind of Victorian type of, whatever. I look at it this way. First of all, everybody has manners. It's kind of value neutral. The question is, how are your manners, right? Kind of in a three-dimensional way, right? So I view it very broadly. I view it in the context of your manners is the total way in which you show up in the world, your essence, how you present. So it's your personality, it's your behavior, it's your speaking, it's your listening, it's your body language. It's, some people call it your karma. It's kind of how you present yourself in the world. The one way that I try to explain it is that if you go to a fantastic play and you see this incredible actor and you're like in love and like, oh wow, I just love that person. And then you meet him off stage after the show's over and he's a jerk. It's like, that's who he really is. You see, you didn't really know who he was. What you knew was his act called,
Right.
Macbeth or whatever it was. And a lot of us, I think, we do that. We put on acts, right? We run a number, and it's not really kind of who we are. Maybe it is, and maybe you need to work on that. So it's really a broad thing. It's not just please and thank you and mother may I stuff. Now, those are important etiquette things. And if you look at, in fact, one of the reviewers who is in the book, Daniel Post Senning, who comes from the Emily Post Institute, the great great grandson of the
Wow.
famous guru of etiquette,
Wow.
Post. They view etiquette as the large container, and in manners subservient to that. So I'm not claiming that I have it right. I'm saying this is how I'm presenting manners. We all have a manner in which we show up in the world, right? And all of it is a part of your presence. And that's what I'm looking at when I talk about manners.
Okay. So we have manners here and we have judgment.
Yeah.
Is there a difference?
Yeah. So, if you see somebody else's manner that you're not happy or comfortable with, you're likely to make a judgment about that person's manner. Um, and then the question is, how are you going to respond to that? So when our children were younger and they did something that I thought was poor manners, I sat in judgment as the parent to suggest a different way of looking at that, just like my mother did to me. Now, in my day, Calvin, my mom was sensitive to a lot of things that we weren't sensitive to today. As a black man, my mom did not want us going out in public wearing apple hats. There were like these flat hats that, were popularized by the Black Panthers. Now, why was that? It's just a hat, Mom, and all the guys are wearing this cool hat. Well, the reason is that she believed there was a narrative in the majority culture about what black men who wear those hats were like, and in many cases it wasn't favorable, and she was fearful that as a young black man, that if I were to dress a certain way, that I would be judged wrongly or perhaps even harmed because what other people thought about me. So she was working on my manner of how I showed up. So remember I said manner includes a lot of dimensions. It includes how you dress, how you speak, what your behavior is, how you gesture, and there's a lot of examples about where that can go wrong. Um, I have to continually work on my own judgment about other people's manners, um, because sometimes there's just things you don't know about them. You don't know about their history. I might see a fundamentalist religious person, pick your religion, who behaves in a certain way that's rooted in their beliefs, and I might find that behavior not consistent with what I think, but it's not really my business. I don't really know what their history and story is. I think the key is, are they really being true to themselves? Are they being authentic about who they are? And is their behavior bothering somebody else or offending somebody else, right? I mean, so that's sort of the dynamic that you wrestle with.
Okay.
But yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment about your mother. You had told me this, and I wanted to share it. I asked your permission to share it. I think
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
great. Your mother grew up in Atlanta,
Yeah.
Georgia, not necessarily now, but she grew up in Georgia. She lived on a little street, and she used to play with this little kid whose name was Martin, who later grew up to become Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's great. So before we plunge back in, I just got to ask you a Calvin question. I always like to ask this. Um, uh, it's a good cerebral question, and it could be a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 word answer. But living or dead, excluding family or friends, Donald, who would you like to spend the day with? Living or dead, excluding family or friends, who'd you like to spend the day with? You can come up with a couple if you want. It doesn't.
Yeah, John Lewis comes to mind, and for a reason. But yeah, I would say him.
Okay, which is great. I think I told you my meeting John Lewis.
Yeah,
Did I tell you that?
I'm jealous. Yeah,
Yeah. That was one of the great moments of my life, and it's recorded. I told him my story and how we were not related,
Yeah.
but how we were related in the universe. And he was so moved, he grabbed my hands and held them tight. It was a couple years ago. And I have that picture, and I will treasure it forever, that connection I have with John Lewis forever. All right, back to business. So, since presumably a lot of young people are going to see this, I would encourage this. So how can students and early professionals learn what is the mechanism? How they're going to learn about manners? It's nothing that's taught in school. And then a couple of things, 1, 2, 3 things that people can do to improve their manners. It's kind of a loaded question.
Yeah. I would suggest the very first thing people do, so they're not spending a lot of time trying to memorize like a long math word problem, is just spend a week consciously observing people, and particularly people in conversation, one that they're in, just for the sake of doing research. Just pay attention. Who's talking the most? Who's listening to the most? Who always has to have one-upmanship in their story? Are you gossiping about other people? Now, I'm not asking people to make a judgment about what you're hearing. I'm just asking them to notice and just realize what they're noticing about people. Trying to figure out what they want. What does somebody want? Can you tell by what they're saying and how they behave what they want? Notice people's body language in communication. How do they hold their body? Does it suggest anything to you or not? Or just, how would you characterize it? Again, not judging whether it was good or bad or not, just pay attention, because these are people's manners, how they present themselves. And so if you start to look at the world in that way, you begin to notice patterns, I think. And so I would suggest spending some time doing that. The other thing that I strongly recommend, I have a whole chapter on this, is called Who's on Your Team? And team may not have been the best term, but it's really an invitation to have people in your life that you ask them, you give them permission to work with you on whatever it is that you're working on. So let's just say you want to work on your manners, and you are an early career professional and you're looking for the next promotion. And you organize your team, and I have a suggestion as to what I mean by a team and where they come from and how do you pick the right people, all of that. But your team are the people that they're not necessarily your friends. I mean, they could be, but they're not necessarily the kind of friends that always tell you the things that you want to hear. They're the ones that tell you that you have a booger stuck to your nose. They're the ones that tell you that you talk too loud. They're the ones that tell you that, did you realize you just cut Calvin off when you were talking to him? They're the ones that tell you that it feels like you are being dismissive and discounting to women if you were a man. That actually was one of my problems that I had to grow and learn from. And I was fortunate to have people who were willing to call me out on that. And the key is to really welcome that. This is the video camera videoing your interview, right? Remember we talked about the camera sees you in a way that you can't see yourself? Mm-hmm. Your team is that camera, and they're pointing things out to you. And if you cultivate that team, and not everybody belongs on your team, family members, maybe yes, maybe not. I'm fortunate, most of my family members are part of my team, and I welcome that. Some people come from dysfunctional families, some people come from families that you just wouldn't, they have addiction issues or whatever it is. I'm not saying if you don't have to choose people just because of your family. There's different categories, and you can look at that. And they don't necessarily meet, teams don't meet all at once and you sit around and kumbaya. These are just people that will call you up, or you call them up and say, you know what, I'm looking at, my next promotion, and I just want to talk about, my strategy for that. What do you notice about me that you think I need to know. So you're getting external help. Some of the people could be professional people, right? You might hire a coach, you might hire a therapist, you might hire an expert in interviewing, you might hire somebody that you know whose business it is to help people with this. And then there's, you know, your friends, and then there's your professional associates. So there's different categories of people. So that's a great way to learn how to up your game. Read books. I mean, there are a lot of books out there. I mean, I wrote a book on manners, but you can find other books on manners. You find books on etiquette. You can read the Dale Carnegie book. I've read Dale Carnegie. I've reread Dale Carnegie. I've read What's Color is Your Parachute. You know, I'm not saying, in fact, my book is not a work of scholarship. It's my experience. But I stand on the shoulders of a lot of people who look at this stuff. One of the most influential people for me in writing this book was a Harvard business professor named Amy Cuddy, who does a really wonderful TED Talk, primarily aimed at women, about power projection. And I learned a lot from her about body language and power projection and language and things like that. And I quote her in a couple parts of the book. So make a study of this. And the reason I say study this stuff is that, yes, it's important to know how to do your job and to be technical, whatever it is, whether you're a teacher or whether you're a pilot or whether you're an educator. But manners will make the difference. As my brother said, it could be the tiebreaker. A lot of times where your team can come in handy is when they help you see things that are so core to your own personality that you just cannot see it. And it may be very difficult to change without some deeper work. I've been fortunate because I've done a lot of very deep work training where, you know, I got, you know, turned inside out to see what I saw, and it helped me grow significantly for that. So two things: be an observer in communication with people or around people. Just watch and pay attention deeply, listen, and get a group of people to support you, and read and study this stuff.
Good stuff.
That's what I would say.
As somebody used to say in my second life, this is the kind of stuff you can take to the bank.
Yeah, I
Really,
I believe so. And it's not a one size fits all. I hope that comes out clearly. It's that, you know, there's many paths to the throne, right? There's maybe some people get this through martial arts and all that discipline brings to your being. And there may be other ways too. Just see what resonates, right? I've had student early as ninth grade, you know, send me an email saying, "Hey, I read that section on pink suits, and I'm in the middle of a pink suit right now. This was really helpful." So, you know, take what works, right? And if something doesn't resonate, then great, go get something else. But pay attention to your manners.
Yes. You just did a great segue of pink suits, and because there is so much more here to do, and we want to keep our viewers here, I'm going to ask you one last question, and then invite you to come back to finish this. There's a lot to finish, but you mentioned pink suits.
Yeah.
And I think personally, it's one of the great metaphors of all time. So talk about chapter 4 in pink suits, and what does pink suits have to do with manners, actually?
Pink suits is a metaphor for trying something on that you ordinarily wouldn't try on, right? And it may not be the perfect metaphor because I know people wear pink suits, but if someone says, "Hey, I got a great suit for you," and it's all pink, I probably wouldn't wear it. You know, it's probably not my colors, and I'm not trying to stand out, or maybe I'd feel funny. But if I'm invited to try one on, metaphorically, it means someone is asking me to think about something or do something that's completely different than what I might otherwise think about. with respect to manners, manners as a discipline, as a focus of study, could be a very big pink suit for people in and of itself, right? Just the idea of studying how you show up in the world could be a little strange for people. Another way of looking at it is, as I described in that chapter, a series of events that happened to me with respect to my job. And I was presented with what I now label as pink suit opportunities, because certain decisions that I made and things that happened could have very well have caused me to have my career go very differently. Not necessarily good or bad, but just differently, right? So when you are aware that you are at the precipice of a pink suit moment, that's when your manners really are going to serve you well. And if they're bad manners, it's not going to serve you well. I literally believe that I did not get fired from a job once because at the moment of truth, I exercised the right manner in that moment, and it was very authentic, and it was purposeful, and I think it saved my job. So pink suits, try them on, particularly if your teammate tells you. Not everybody. Don't listen to everybody, because some people might not have your well-being at heart, Calvin. It's if someone on your team says, I need you to take a look at this, then it might be worth your while. It's analogous to a family who does an intervention on a family member who has a drug or alcohol problem. And they go to that person as a family and said, you need to go to rehab, and we're going to take you there right now. So you're putting your whole relationship with that person at risk, right? Because he could flip out and flip you off and leave, or whatever it is. And a lot of families don't want to touch these hot button subjects or whatever it is, but many families do. So it's like that, right? And so your manner and how you handle the moment could make a big difference. Sometimes it could make a life or death difference.
Wow.
And you can talk about that, but there's a lot of things that are going on in this country that I think appropriate manners by a lot of people could have made a difference between life and death.
Yeah.
I believe that.
Yep. How powerful. I one more. I've written down. I've got a whole bunch of things here, but one more that kind of piqued my. In your acknowledgement, you talk about a friend and former coworker, Lou.
Yeah.
He probably kept you from getting fired.
Yeah.
Just kind of, you gave an acknowledgement. Just your final thoughts on Lou and what he did for you.
Well, this was the same story that I just alluded to about how I responded.
Okay.
What happened was that I exercised, obviously in hindsight, very poor judgment about something.
Okay.
Even though how I got caught with this poor judgment was very nefarious, it didn't matter. And the director of the center where I worked was hot, and he dispatched his deputy, who was Lou Braxton, to summon me to go explain myself. Now, what viewers need to know is Lou I had known him for a long time. We were roommates a long time ago, and we followed each other's careers. So I had a great relationship with him. And the director knew that. And so he was not happy. Lou was not happy, and he asked me about the situation, and I fessed up. And he hauled me down to the director's office. It was like walking to the electric chair. And I walked into the director's office, and he was not happy. He raised his voice, and it was what people are going to find out in their careers if they mess up is that you're going to be in what I call a one-way conversation, which means that the first thing you need to do is sit better off to defend yourself because you'll end up being roadkill probably. So the first order of business is to stand there respectfully and hear, really hear what is being said to you. And so I did that. I did that until I saw my opportunity. When the steam and the director went away sufficiently and he caught his breath, whereupon I looked him straight in the eye and I said, Pete, how can I make this right?
Wow.
How can I make this right? That was a game changer.
Wow.
There was something about that question at that moment that
Wow.
he looked at me and he said a few things, but I can tell you and everybody listening that by the time we were finished, he stood up, he shook my hand and said, Don, you know, you really are a good guy and I'm glad you're on our team. And we parted ways and I kept my job.
Wow. You know, I wrote that down just now. How can I make this right?
Yeah.
Wow, is that powerful? And that's a great way to close this chapter, which leads me to invite you back, Donald. And I didn't, I'll say it on air, you know, this channel evolves. It has evolved beyond what I would have ever thought it would be when I did this on a whim back in September. It keeps on evolving, and I'm sitting here with you, which is just, it kind of blows me away looking at you and that NASA thing in the background. So I've been very gifted to have had you here, and I of course invite you back, and I can't thank you enough for your time and your graciousness. And I mean, I'll say it on air, if this channel evolves, anytime you have some kind of idea, whatever, guess what? One of my things that I live and breathe by, and I'm older than you. I love to say that. I love to bring up, you know, to play the age game. I'm older than you, but anytime you have an idea, and loyalty is what I live and breathe by.
Yeah.
And that's probably, you know, that's probably embedded into manners.
Yes.
Having a sense of loyalty. I haven't finished your book yet, but I live my life just being loyal. So anytime you have an idea, I'm here, literally 24/7. We can pursue that. But it's a great way to close, to thank you so much for being you, and how gracious you are, and for having done this, because I think this is going to be, I'm going to use a semi-military term, SOP.
Standard operating procedure.
Correct. I love to invoke those military things, but it will be. But anyway, thank you so much, Donald.
You're welcome, and I'm grateful, Cal.
Thank you.
There will be more, and I look forward to coming back.
Wonderful.
Thank you for being on my team, Cal.
I'm on your team. I really am. Thank you. Thank you, Donald.